Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in today to talk about Weekly Shonen Jump, issue number 46 of 2024. But today we're doing a mini episode of the Let's Talk About Weekly Shonen Jump series because I read this issue here. Of course, this is issue number 46 of 2024, as I mentioned, 10 seconds ago or something. And I read this issue, and I didn't initially I wasn't planning on doing a video on this issue, because I did I did a video on issue 45, and I was like, yeah, I could sort of take a break, maybe skip all the way to, issue 47 or 48 or something like that. But I read this issue, and I'm like, man, that was so good. Some of the chapters here are ones that I absolutely want to talk about at some point, but don't feel like they need a video 100% dedicated to them. So I put out a little post on Twitter. I may put it up on the screen right now, and also Blue Sky and all of those other alternative places out there. I'm like, damn, this episode of Shonen Jump was really good, and I want to talk about it, but I don't know how I want to talk about it. So I decided on let's do something called a mini episode, which is pretty much, instead of covering all 14 series I read this week, we are just going to be covering 6 of them instead. With that, I do want to mention hey, Kagurabachi is part of the best 7 that I wanted to focus on, but being that I do separate videos on Kagurabachi, I am not going to talk about it majorly here, just go through everything. And don't get me wrong, I will still be going through every single chapter I read in Jump this week, but most of them will just be the really, really short ones, hey, in Hunter x Hunter, this is what happened, and that's that. I'm only going to be going into depth and really describing what happens in the first 7 chapters I talk about here today, or 6 chapters, whatever it is, but you guys will see as we get into it, you'll be able to see the time codes down below, hey, that section was 7 minutes, and this section was 4. I guess it's a very bad example. This section was 25 minutes, and this section was 2. That's a much better example there, but without really any of that, I don't have too much else to say about it. Of course, at the end of the video, we will do the whole, I've already ranked the chapters this week. That's how I sort of knew what I wanted to talk about. And then we'll just talk about all of that very stuff, hey, who are the best characters of the week, what were the best chapters, and all of that. But with all of that, I just say let's go ahead and hop right into it. How I normally do this is go through the chapters in the order that I read them in Jump, of course, normally starting off on Unlocked and going to One Piece and all of that sort of stuff, yada yada. But the way we're going to do it today is just talk about all of the chapters I want to focus on first, and then do everything in everything I didn't want to focus on at the end. But we'll still go through them in the way I read them, if that makes sense. So we're going to start off with One Piece, then move on to Kagurabachi, Ichi the Witch, Hima-Ten, talk about the ones I want to talk about. And then right after Elusive Samurai, we'll talk about Undead Unluck, and then Hunter x Hunter, if that sort of makes sense. So we're still going to be going in order, but we're splitting the order into 2 parts, the good stuff and the mediocre stuff. And we're going to talk about the good stuff first, in the order I normally read it in. I hope all of that makes decent enough sense. I'm going to take one more drink of water real quick as we get into One Piece chapter number 1129. This chapter is titled Live Dolls. So we start off this chapter with another one of the Ogre Child Yamato's Golden Harvest Surrogate Pilgrimage, volume number 16, Ninja Training at Amigasa Village. It looks like we see Shinobu here is sort of training somebody how to do the Way of the Ninja stuff. I forget her name right now. Is it Otoko? Is I think the one that she's teaching this to, and then we see that Yamato is just in the background there, right? But that's not really the important thing. Of course, right now, all of the 6 original Straw Hats are on the back of Master Izcat, who was the captain or the king of the Big Stein Castle. And we saw the Sun God was running behind them and chasing the Straw Hats as Izcat was sort of running through the sort of simulated town that the Sun God had built inside of this cage of some sort, right? And as we sort of start off this chapter, we see a bunch of the giants who are living in this area oh no, Master Sun God, please quell your anger, look over there, flames and cracks in the sky, the kingdom is doomed, the world is ending, right? And we then see the Sun God just says hey, you live dolls will pay for what you did to my room, to my temple, right? And he says, and to my pets, no, I mean my servants, right? Of course, we're saying hey, the Ear God and all of these other Izcat are all this guy's pets that he's just sort of put in a role of power here inside of the things. And I do like to joke how the Sun God just can't get his story straight in a way. It's a little bit of a funny joke there. We see all of these Straw Hats are running away from the Sun God, obviously. I do like Usopp, or no, I think it's actually Zoro's God, that guy looks like more of a demon, like what's going on over here, right? But all the straw hats are on the back of Is-Cat sort of jumping over everything, and Luffy just says like, hey, if that guy put all of the work into building this, well, we gotta split without busting it up too much, right? As we then just see Is-Cat falls into the ground and demolishes a lot of the building blocks and everything that are there. It's another one of those like really funny like build up to the jokes. I really like it, right? We see the sun god is hot on their tails, and he's just like, wait, Is-Cat, why are you helping all of those people, right? And eventually they're all just talking. Straw Hats are bickering back and forth. Usopp is like, hey, hit your head on this cat, took us to the end of the world in no time, as we see that they're getting on the very other edge of the thing. And we get a little bit of a map here as we see sort of like the diagram and diorama of how this thing's built. And we see the Big Stein Castle is located semi in the middle of where the entire area, and we see the world tree that we saw in the background is actually just the backdrop of on the back wall of this room. Right, we see it's got the mirrors on it, making it look like it goes forever and all of that sort of deal, right? Nami says that she pretty much found this map earlier and memorized it, so that's how she knows what this layout looks, right? Zoro then just says like, hey, it may look huge to us, but to a giant, this is probably just a big regular old room, and that's why it looks like almost a kingdom to us is for this one reason, which really begs the question, how big of an island is Elbaf to like stimulate such a big economy of these creatures and all of that sort of deal, when what looks almost like an entire kingdom to the Straw Hats is just one room on Elbaf? But I think it's something we're going to be getting next chapter by the end of what we see in this chapter here. Sanji also makes the like observation like, hey, but also the reason why this room looks so massive is because all of the mirrors on the walls making everything look like it's propagating more and more and more, right? Well, as all of this continues to go on, the sun god's like, oh, I hear all of you guys down there, so I see you guys have seen the schematics, and now you've imagined that you've figured out this world, haven't you? Well, this was originally a holding giant for, or holding cell for giants, right? As he pretty much fashions a net out of his pocket or something. I do like the net, how like the circular thing that the string's attached to actually is like points out in like a star or like a sun almost, like really getting into that sun god narrative, as he takes the net down and slams it on all of the various Straw Hats and Is-Cat, right? The sun god just says like, hey, this was built to prevent giants from escaping. No matter if you don't reach the wall or not, you will never break through it. There is only a dead end. And we get a little bit of this sun god's laugh. He goes, "Da foo 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 foo," right? So a little bit of like, hey, this is how this bad guy laughs in One Piece, right? At this point, Zoro and Sanji are just like, hey, you put a net on us, well, I have a sword and he's got a flaming kick. We will make it out of here. They make it out of there, and Is-Cat sort of jumps off and starts to run away some more. It is then said that Sun God's like, hey, they broke through my metal wire, as we understand, like, yeah, that's actually a lot more of a feat if that thing is literal metal wire that he used to, like, control it. But also, we do see it sort of flex a little bit as he, like, swings it, which would make sense if he's a giant, like, the metal wire would flex, being that he's got enough power to sort of move it. So I really like how these giants are being set up. Like, it's just really, really awesome. Pretty much we see a bunch of the giants on the ground like, oh, mighty Sun God, we have some bad news about the ear god. It was mysteriously burned to death earlier today. The sight may be heartbreaking and a little more than ominous, right? And pretty much like, this day is so terrible, like everything's just going to shit. What are we going to do, right? As we see the Sun God's like, how did they defeat it? Impossible. That was a vicious carnivorous rabbit. My glut bunny. As we see just an image of this bunny, and yeah, it looks like a bunny that would fuck some people up. But hey, apparently Luffy killed it on his own, so that's sort of what it is there, right? More of the giants on the ground like, hey, we just found it like that, like we don't know what happened to it. And the Sun God just starts to laugh some more like, dafu, dafu, foo, 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 dafu, foo, foo, dafu, foo, foo. Just does more of that One Piece laugh, just lovely and wonderful. This too is how the world works. A story without a script unfolding in my little walled garden. Which is like, oh, little walled garden, little garden where we first got introduced to giants in the One Piece universe. This chapter is just really, really fun. But Sun God just continues like, hey, I underestimated them. They're most exciting after all. Now the world I created has developed its own evil and its own heroes. History is being written in my own ecosystem right before my eyes. This is the charm of my little live dolls, the mini world that belongs only to me. We see all of the giants on the floor, or all of the, I guess, regular citizens or whatever they are. They are all like, hey, this might be our chance, like, let's escape from this area, because it sort of seems like, yeah, they understand that this isn't a very good thing to be going on, so they are like, hey, as soon as we can get out of here, let's just, like, run away. At this point, the Sun God just starts to continue more like, hey, now dance and struggle in my palm. Hardrin may accept you, but I do not, so what is your move? We see that Sanji uses a special attack, Green Star Skull Blast Grass, and does all of that, and he's like, no good, it only broke the exterior of the mirror, like, how are we gonna break through this concrete wall behind it? And hearing this, Luffy's like, hey, I don't know, maybe I have a way we could do all of this sort of thing, right? The Sun God just continues some more, saying like, hey, defu-fu-fu-fu, good, yes, this pleases me, hopeless dolls fighting back against fate, best story ever. A part of the world is despair and hopelessness, and part of the history is defeat and disappointment. The tragic work of folly, and so brave, the real tearjerker. I'm glad to have you in my collection. Ultra rare Luffy, ultra rare Zoro, ultra rare Nami, ultra rare Usopp. And at this point, Nami and Zoro's like, wait, this guy knows who we are, so he knows why he put us in here. And then we sort of just see like these feelings like, hey, ultra rare Sanji, ultra rare Chomper, or Chopper, if I could speak. And then Luffy just says like, hey, time to bust open a hole. Mini Gear 4 as he fires off an attack at the wall and all of that sort of deal, right? Pretty much they all talk back and forth a little bit. Nami just says like, hey, natural disasters aren't anyone's fault, isn't that correct? And Usopp's like, I mean, yeah, I mean, sure, earthquakes, floods, and lightnings, I mean, you can't blame those on anyone else, right? And as all of this is sort of going on, Sun God just continues like, hey, I won't rest till I crush you to bits with my foot. I wouldn't worry, though. He'll get his, I guess that's what Nami's saying. We get a few of gray panels, which is like a little backstory of what's happening on here, as we see that a bird named Mugen brought the Straw Hat ship over to this guy, supposedly the Sun God, and he's like, oh, what have you brought me this time, Mugen? Wait, this is a Straw Hat crew? The giant pirates were sailing out to escort them back. I don't understand what happened. They're all asleep here. Like, did they pass through the sleeping mist on the route to Egghead, right? He's pretty much like, hey, Defufu, we can tell this same guy, like, hey, when I heard that Hardin had cast aside his dignity and become his henchman, I was furious. Does that make me a member of the new giant pirates, a henchman too? An almighty warrior of Elbaf, subsequent to some tiny human? Has he no pride? And he's like, hey, look at these tiny, frail figures. And he pretty much says like, hey, I need you guys to go back to sleep, and when you wake up again, you'll simply go missing to the rest of the world. Instead, you'll be stuck here with me, struggling to get free. It will not serve you. You will serve me. And at this point, he gets electrocuted by a storm cloud, which is Nami using Zeus over him in the sky, and is using a lightning blast attack on it. And as this happened, Luffy's modified Gear 4 Gum Gum Kong Gun finally hits through the brick wall and breaks it open, right? As Luffy just declares it, Zoro's like, hey, we're finally outside at last, and everybody's like, hey, please let it be Elbaf outside of this thing. And as they all make it outside on the back of Izcat, of course, we just see Luffy's like, look at that, as he gets a official look at what Egghead actually looks like. And that is where we end this chapter of One Piece this week. This was a really fun chapter through and through, sort of learning about the Sun God more and what this guy does specifically. It seemed like this entire universe was just like a little bit of a, like, just his own personal domain where he was the own personal god. So it doesn't seem like this Sun God guy is too important in the grand scheme of things. It just seems like this may be his little bit of a twisted hobby, but either way, really fun chapter through and through. Next up is Kagurabachi, chapter number 53. This chapter is titled Darkness. And I should mention that the cover for Weekly Shonen Jump this week is actually a Kagurabachi cover, and Kagurabachi does have the 2-page spread in the middle of the magazine this week. Like I said, I'm not going to talk about this chapter for too long, being for the fact of, I will have a full-length video on it out here pretty soon. It'll actually be the next video I record after I record this weekly Shonen Jump video right here. But pretty much this chapter is all about the confrontation between Hirohiko and Chihiro. We get a little bit of flashback in the beginning of Samura, Chihiro, and Shiba all sort of together in the continuation of a flashback that we saw not too long ago. And then it's the whole confrontation between Hirohiko and Chihiro, as the two of them sort of go back and forth. Hirohiko uses her paper power to sort of scatter paper all around the area, and we pretty much understand that Hirohiko is also going to be using a lot of the bystanders who are in the audience of the play here to pretty much get the idea across, like, hey, Chihiro is going to have to kill some other people if he ends up wanting to get through to Hirohiko themselves, right? Hirohiko pretty much says, like, hey, are you paralyzed? Yeah, if you're going to get to me, you have to take on some of these other people. And eventually Hirohiko just says, like, hey, come on. To get to the Spout of the Deaf, you have to kill some of these people. So what are you going to do? And eventually, Hirohiko just says, like, oh, so you're a Sasuke too, of course, referring to the play person, or the main character of the play that was depicted last time. I don't remember the name of it right now. I'll have to just, like, reread that chapter in preparation for my actual video on it. But eventually, Chihiro just gets attacked by all of the various paper cranes that Hirohiko is able to form with their ability. And there's a little bit more of a flashback between Samura and Chihiro, where Samura's like, hey, the first time I cut a person, I couldn't stand to see their flesh all severed. That's the other reason I blinded myself. And Chihiro just says, like, hey, but even so, you chose to wield an enchanted sword. Wasn't that to save everybody? And Samura says, like, I mean, yes, it was. I just had to keep fighting throughout the darkness. And Chihiro just says, like, well, then, but Samura says, like, hey, but that's not something to aspire to. I am going to hell. Instead of admiring you, and then Chihiro just says, like, hey, instead of admiring you, I'll respect you then. And Samura says, great, you're welcome to do that. But you're not trying to become a swordsman anyway, right? We then cut back to the present, where Chihiro is, of course, just completely destroyed by all of these papers, as he just thinks of his father and of Samura, and he's like, hey, sorry, but I'm going to have to go down that same path too. As he just calls out the attack of Kuro, and all of the black goldfish start swarming out from around him, and completely paint the world around them in black, as Chihiro, with almost superhuman speed, appears behind Hirohiko and goes through, and it looks like maybe lops off one of Hirohiko's arms as he just comes through around to him. And eventually, we see that he's just pinning up Hirohiko right on the side of the chair, and Hirohiko's like, what happened? But Chihiro just is like, hey, don't worry, I'm a sinner too. The first time I killed a person, I accepted that I am that monster. The least I can do is refrain from causing harm to others, and take you Hishaku bastards to hell with me. Now talk. As this chapter is all about that conviction that Chihiro pulls through. We saw that he's sort of been more of like that softy with like more of like the Haruhi situation, all of that going on. But this is that redefinition of his character of, damn, he is willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that he avenges the people who are close to him, mainly his father, and in the process, take all of those Hishaku bastards to hell with him. Really fun chapter of Kagurabachi. Like I said, expect the regular full-length video on it to be out decently soon. But yeah, really solid chapter through and through, and seeing Chihiro, what he did in this chapter was really awesome. Next up is Ichi the Witch, chapter number 6. This chapter is titled The Sixth Hunt, Team Descaras. And the sort of like cover page of this chapter, we see Shira Bendona, who last time I think I wrongly called the Antillic Witch, when I guess I just couldn't read because she is the Analytic Witch. I don't know what I was thinking. I guess I just wasn't reading the word as it should have. I was thinking like, oh, magic, like a different type of world. Maybe Antillic is spelled, not as Analytic is spelled Antillic, or said Antillic, because it's like, oh yeah, fantasy realm, funny stuff, yada yada yada. I was just like pure plain wrong. I don't know what I was thinking, but sort of is what it is there. But of course, at the end of last chapter, we had the whole thing where Oro had appeared right behind Ichi, And the beginning of this chapter is actually a little bit of like narration coming from Oro himself. As Oro's just like, hey, for much of my life, I've watched witches mercilessly hunt down magics. We magics were here long before humanity even existed. We lived together, laughed together, and help each other grow and improve. Our days were peaceful and harmonious. But then humanity was born. Humans hunted magics, exploiting us for their own selfish desires. I've watched hundreds of my own kind get captured, humiliated, and used as tools. But why must it only be magics who suffer? Why must arrogant, greedy humans spread and thrive? As after he goes through all of this, like, sort of conviction that he has, pretty much he just tries to convince Ichi, like, hey, Ichi, you have potential. With my help, you could easily wipe out all of the witches. Like, you felt that attack a moment ago, and that's why you aimed towards the mirror up in the sky. Like, you clearly see what's going on with them. So what's wrong with striving with all of these magics? Hey, join me, Ichi. We'll go on a witch hunt together. We'll free to trap magics from the witch's nefarious clutches. Come, Ichi. As Oro reaches out a hand to Ichi. And Ichi goes and actually takes Oro's hand. And then slams the motherfucker on the ground, pretty much grabbing his sort of forearm, and then in a one fell motion, reaching up, grabbing him, and spinning him around, and smashing Oro straight on the ground. And as he does this, Oro's, like, form, like, suddenly sort of, like, disappears in a way and, like, splashes onto all of the other witches. It's a really, really awesome page turn as you get from this moment of Oro like, Ichi, you can join me. We can do something greater. And the next chapter, as Ichi's starting to grow his hand, he just slams him on the ground in, like, this double page spread. This was the moment when I said, damn it, I'm going to have to do a video on this week of Jump because I need to talk about how cool this damn moment was in general, right? At this point, we just see Ichi's like, hey, that was my ultimate technique, one-shot shoulder throw. He's like, hey, I've used that one to take down bears in the past. Good thing to know, it works on Oro and all of that sort of deal, right? But he pretty much just says, like, hey, who's his face? Oh, you know, Ichi just says, like, hey, that was a lot of, whole lot of bald-faced lies all at once. If you hated magics being hunted, as you say, you would have been much more upset when I caught Inazori Raiko magic, right? He's like, hey, and if you really wanted revenge for them, your eyes would gleam with a fierce light. As we see a little bit of an image where Ichi killed a pig back in whenever he was just a regular hunter, and then we see another boar who was probably the mother or friends of this other pig, has that conviction in the eyes, right? And Ichi just, like, takes Oro down, saying, like, hey, but your eyes are empty. It's as if you aren't interested in anything but yourself. And as I said before, I'm sensitive to these hostile presences. I can feel your bloodlust constantly seething in my gut. I've lost track of the number of times I've had to resist a sudden urge to take a knife and stab myself, which... you cannot be this much of a badass, Ichi. Like, what the fuck? That's just so awesome, right? At this point, Oro's just like, oh, so the sympathy angle doesn't work on you, alright. Well, you're more heartless than I thought. The world would have been better off if you listened to me and killed yourself, along with the witches, you feral brat. And he's just like, you show your true... if I could speak, you show your true colors, parasite, and I get to hunt down the whole lot of more pests like you. Things just got much more fun. As we see that, like, our Oro and Ichi have, like, a little bit of, like, a wrestling match of, like, just, like, two teenagers on the floor. It's honestly really, really funny, right? And as all of this is going on, Shirabandona, the analytic witch, just turns over to Deathcry and says, hey, personally, I think he's the right one. As Shirabandona walks over to Ichi and just points him and is like, yes, I vouch for you. You're very good. And he's like, and with this, the judgment is complete. Ladies, do you agree? As all of a sudden, raining down from that mirror in the sky, we see a bunch of little papers that sort of flow down, and each of them have a stamp of approval on them. As Shirabandona just says, like, hey, Ichi, you are hereby officially recognized as a witch of the Mantinal Witches Association. And he's like, hey, all of the other witches gave you their approval too. But she says, but that was mostly because I see the potential in you myself. And she says, like, hey, didn't you wonder why I, out of everyone, was the one who got permission to approach you and examine you? It's because my analyses are never wrong. If I say something is correct, then by definition, it is correct. That is why I am Shirobindona, the analytic witch. Let me mute Discord there, but this was such a fucking awesome moment whenever Shirobindona just says, like, hey, my analyses are never wrong. And that's the reason why if I say something is correct, then by definition, it is correct. Like, that is such a really awesome moment. Is like, I make the rules here and you follow. It's, man, Ichi the Witch is such an awesome series, right? But pretty much as all of this sort of like says, like, hey, still, like, we can't be sure that, like, you still have a lot of risks associated to you, Ichi. So let's assign a watch to Ichi, someone who wherever he goes, observing and recording his actions. And at this point, Descross says, oh, recording? And both Shirobindona, Ichi, and Descross all look over to Komugi, who is the recorder of the Mantinal Witches Association, like, Witches, club or whatever, right? And Shirobindona's like, all right, good, that decides that. The association's provisioners have a uniform ready for you. Your wand, that's your knife, I guess, that should undergo full maintenance as well. As Komugi's just like, hey, excuse me, like, please slow down. Is this really the job that I'm getting thrust into here? As at this point, we cut over to a few different places in the Mantinal Witches Association. As we go over to the fashion department, where we see a bunch of the witches are like, oh my gosh, it's a man, it's a boy, like, somebody who can use magic, like, this is absolutely insane. As we see who is supposed to be the lead witch here, she's like, hey, of course, I have it right here. We've never made a man's uniform before, but not in the whole history of the association. So we were excited and sort of went all out on it. But like, hey, don't worry about the size. The outfit will adjust itself to fit you, which is like, yeah, that makes sense in like sort of the magic of the world. Honestly, sort of reminds me of Clothy from Undead Unluck, who sort of has the same power, but yeah, well, whatever. And you also tell Ichi, like, hey, if you need modifications, just come to us and we can sort you out. And like, hey, I would really like to get proper measurements for you, so could you come back sometime later? And Ichi's like, yeah, for sure. Obviously, sort of not like recognizing any of like the innuendos that are going on here, right? We then get over to the wand and tools department, as we see another witch is like, great, hey, can you put the magic stone in my hand, please? And she just says like, oh, look at this. The stones don't change, even if it's a man who ended up catching it. We then see he's like, all right, your wand will be a dagger too. I'd love to give it a new edge, and like, how about we decorate the hilt a little bit? We'll hold up, and like, hey, she pretty much just like goes through and is like, hey, I'll do a bunch of these things and make it really cool. She talks about like the color designing on it, like, hey, black, since the magic stones, gold and purple, will make a little bit of a twilight in it, but make it white and red, that'd be also cool. And Ichi's sort of freaking out, like, why are they just like getting rid of my knife like that? Like, that's my prized possession, right? And at this point, we see that Shirobindona introduces everybody to their first mission that they will be going on as a team. As Shirobindona just says like, hey, now on to your first mission. Your target is the Hasame magic. As we see, this is a shark magic of some type. And she says like, hey, we've received multiple reports of frost damage from nearby villages. Acquire Hasame as quickly as possible and save all of the various villagers. We're counting on you, ladies and gentlemen. As we understand, the team that Ichi will be part of is the anti-human hater magic squad, Team Descaros. The team lead, of course, is Descaros, and the team members are Ichi, Komugi, and just by like the nature of it, also Oro, right? And at this point, we see Ichi in his full guard and everything, and he's just like, all right, let's go. It's time to hunt an ice shark. And that is where we end off this chapter of Ichi the Witch. This chapter was just great and absolutely fun, like, so awesome. Like, we see this beginning with Oro. We then sort of like get told joke of like, all right, Komugi, you are going to be part of this, our core cast of characters. Is like the one who's like, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm forced to be here. It's a trope that a lot of manga do to have sort of like that. It happened in MASH with like Finn, for instance, is that character who doesn't understand everything that's going on, but has enough context to sort of see like the crazy shit that that Descaros and Ichi will be getting up to. Then going around to see all the various departments in the Witches Association before getting introduced to the Hasame magic. And then Ichi, who is very happy, like, hey, we're going to hunt an ice shark. Really, really, really awesome moment. And this was just a great chapter of Ichi the Witch through and through. Next up, I think, will be a bit of a quicker one, but this is the chapter of Hima-Ten, chapter number 14. This chapter is titled Shining Heroine. And we see this chapter takes place after midterm exams, which was, of course, the whole sort of reasoning going on for last chapter. We see that Himari and Iamori sort of have a little bit of conversation about how all of these things are going on. Oh, I'm sorry. Himari asked, like, hey, Himari and Iamori sometimes just get my head mixed up, and, like, I haven't talked about this series quite for long enough to 100% remember their names, but, like, sort of is what it is. But Himari just asked, like, hey, Iamori, do you think you did okay? And he's like, yeah, I think so. And he just thinks, like, hey, ever since that day that she helped me study, Kanai has been on my mind more and more. At this point, we cut over to some vending machines where we see Iamori is standing around with one of his friends. This friend is named Yoko Mizo, yeah. I want to say, like, Mizu, but, like, yeah, Yoko Mizu. I don't know if we've seen this guy before, but he definitely seems as, like, the Shu character in this series is, like, hey, who is the good old friend that everybody else has, right? But pretty much we just see through here that Imori's like, hey, Yokomizo, it's May in our second year of high school. We got to study for college entrance exams soon. We won't have as much free time. And hearing all of this, Yokomizo's like, hey, so you're finally going after Kanai, aren't you? And Imori's like, huh, like, what are you talking about? Like, when did you figure it out? Like, yeah, that's actually his goal. Pretty much the two of them just banter a little bit. Yoko Mizu just says, like, hey, whenever you looked at all of the girls, you were always locked in on Kanai, but lately you've been paying attention to Himarin just as much. Like, I thought things were getting dicey, but you're finally going for it. And plus, Kanoe told me all about the stand-up show and your study date, which, if we learn that Yoko Mizu talks with Kanoe a lot, I don't know if I can trust Yoko Mizu, because I could not trust Kanoe as a person. Like, what are we talking about here, right? A little bit of more narration, like, hey, Kanai's been popular since middle school. If you've got your mind set on her, you better go for it now, right? As all this is going on, Imori's like, hey, but how do I even go and try to approach Kanai? Like, Yokomizu's like, hey, how should I even know? You're the one who knows the expert on romance. And Imori's like, I do. It's Himari. We see that Yokomizu has called Himari over, and Himari's like, hey, so what are you trying to ask me for advice of some type? And or Yoshino, that's what I normally call her. That's what I was thinking, like, yeah, Himari's not what I call her, it's Yoshino. But Imori's like, Yoshino, what are you doing here? And we've learned that Yoko Mizu just, like, called her over during all of this, and then he runs away, being like that same third wheel sign kind of deal. The two of them have a little bit of a talk as they're just going back and forth, and eventually Imori's like, oh, it's nothing, but eventually Yoshino just says, like, hey, and here I thought you were going to ask me for romantic advice about Hanoka. Was I wrong? And Imori's like, huh? And he's like, no way, why would you think that? And Yoshino says, like, hey, based on that, it looks like I've hit the mark. We sort of just see Imori's like, hey, is it really that easy to tell what I'm thinking? And Yoshino's like, hey, well, maybe it's because I'm so insightful, but you can't help but look up to Hanoka, right? And she just says, like, hey, you've liked her ever since middle school and never asked her out. And Imori's like, hey, what was I supposed to do at some point? But he's like, hey, even back in middle school, Kanai was super cute. And at this point, we see a little bit of a flashback of just what Kanai looked back at that point. And yes, she looked very cute. But Imori just says, like, hey, she's kind and she always smiles, but she can also be determined and strong. I thought that just being able to do chores would make me good enough for her. But now I don't want her to know that I just look up to her. I've liked her all this time. I want to get up to a point where I can actually tell her. I want to give it everything that I've got. But I have no idea what to do. But eventually he's like, but hey, Yoshino, none of this is actually relevant to you, though. Like, this is just what I'm doing. And at this point, Yoshino's like, well, hey, Iomori, well, I've struggled a lot with not having self-confidence too, so I actually get it. But Iomori's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm just looking at you and, like, you're definitely competent. Like, what are you talking about? And Yoshi's like, well, yeah, I am now, but look at this picture. As she shows a picture, Iomori a picture of her Unger on her phone, and she's like, hey, that was me during my first year of middle school. And we just see this picture of Himari, and Iomori's like, oh, what in the world? Like, seriously? And he's like, she still looks cute to me, so, like, I don't know what she's going on about all of that, right? But pretty much Yoshino just says, like, hey, I don't know how I know how I look now, but I had to claw my way up. I came from the middle of nowhere in Saitama Prefecture. Like, hey, you're more of a city kid than I am, and I've always been a go-giver, and I wanted to fix the inferiority complex I had, so I studied makeup way more than anyone else, and that's how I became who I am now. Of course, the president of her own company, right? And she just says, like, like, I stared at that picture for too long again, like, I totally used to be a total potato, right? But Iomori just says, like, hey, I don't think you were, but you do look different compared to now. And she's just like, hey, is that right? So anyway, I know you're not just talking about looks, but as the president of a cosmetics company, here's what I think. Anyone can shine brighter with a little polish. It's just about whether or not you put the effort in or not. And that's really it. And Iomori's like, so did you just show me an old picture of yourself just to tell me that? As Yoshino's like, hey, it's not anything like special that only you've seen. I've even uploaded it to my socials in the past, right? But she just says, like, hey, whatever happens, I'll cheer you on. Even though I know the two of you got together, you'd have to quit being my house cleaner. And Iomori's like, oh, Yoshino, but pretty much she just says, like, hey, so when are you telling her, right? And he's like, not for a while. Don't have to worry about finding a new house cleaner for a while. Like, I'll still be there to do that. And at that point, we cut away to the final scene of the chapter, where we see that Kana, who of course is Kana Aizawa, the other model who we met a few chapters ago, is getting off a train. We see that she's in a schoolgirl uniform, and she says, oh man, I'm finally here to check out Himari's school. I wonder if Iomori's around. Obviously saying, like, right, we now need to drive a stake into these problems. But yeah, this was just a really beautiful chapter of Hima-Ten. I'm sorry, I don't know why just during this segment my brain is like completely fogged out on what I'm supposed to be talking about, right? But this was just a great chapter through and through, just like learning more, like, hey, alright, everybody know that Iomori has this total crush on Kanai, and we all know that Kanai has a total crush on Iomori back, so things were just like the progress that this goes through, and eventually having this whole idea of, alright, here's how Yoshino will go about this, and will sort of explain this to Iomori in a way that she feels it, and says, like, hey, it's okay to be who you are, and hey, as long as you work towards it, you're doing a good job. Nothing more than that really matters. It's such a nice message through and through, just that whole thing of, like, hey, anyone can shine brighter with a little polish. Not only works as her whole idea of, like, hey, I'm the owner of a literal, like, makeup brand and all of that, but also, it's just something true about humans or two. Really awesome chapter, and then just the whole idea of, alright, how are we putting a stake in making this even more confusing and worse with now, alright, Kana's here, yada yada yada. But yeah, great chapter of Hima-Ten through and through. But with that out of the way, that means next up is Akane-banashi, chapter number 130. This chapter is titled, It's All a Mess. And let me just say it, let's just hop straight into the literal best chapter of manga I've probably read all year, but yeah, this was an absolutely amazing chapter of manga through and through. And we start off this chapter with a color page, of course, where young Akane is following Shiguma as he's walking around. Because, of course, last chapter, we saw Shiguma collapse onto the floor. And Akane just sort of found him like that. And we start off this chapter on a train platform as we see a train arrive and just like, hey, final stop, Tokyo Station. Please check your belongings and make sure you have everything. As we see Giriko gets off this train back from wherever he was in Kanto, I think, and now we see that he's back in Tokyo. I actually do not remember where he was, though, right? But we see that he checks his phone, and we see that there is a hospital that Akane has sent him through text message. And we see that Giriko finally arrives over there and is like, hey, Akane, is everything all right? Like, where's Master? And Akane just says, like, oh, he's over here. As we get an image of Shiguma laying on a hospital bed, and we see Giriko sort of looking down at Shiguma. And he's like, oh, Master, like, what is this? And Akane's like, hey, shh. He's not dead, he's only sleeping, like it just happened yesterday, but he needs plenty and plenty of rest. And we see that Akane is putting some flowers up for him on sort of a bedside table, as Giriko just says like, hey, it must have been really hard for you, like, is everything alright? But Akane's like, hey, all I did was just call the ambulance, really, like, all of the other Anisans helped out contacting all of the paperwork and doing all of that sort of stuff. She's like, hey, but I'm off, like, I've got to put together a full set of hospital safe supplies for tonight, and Giriko's like, hey, I'll go with you, you probably want a guy to help you out doing all of that sort of stuff, right? So we see the two of them arrive back at the Shiguma house, of course, and Giriko and Akane are sort of going back and forth, like, hey, how many outfits do we think we'll need? Like, hey, well, at least 3 to start with, and we can bring something more or whatever he wants to if we really need to think about it. And Akane's like, hey, we'll also need to, like, grab a few other things. And as we're going through all of this stuff, looking at, like, a medication book and all of that, Akane finds a picture of all of the old Shiguma and all of his other Anisans, as we pretty much just see all of them sort of hanging out together. And as Akane is sort of looking at this, she suddenly sets it down as Giriko calls her over to say something, right? And Giriko's like, hey, get a load of this. Like, how many pairs of hoppy coats and loincloths does this guy have? Like, I think Master's obsession with festivals might really be a really big problem, as we see that he's holding, like, a bunch of loincloths and also the hoppy coats at the same time. And Akane makes this little bit of a face, and Giriko's like, what is that face supposed to represent? And Akane's like, I mean, half this face is like, hey, we should be taking this really seriously, and the other half is like, wow, that's actually really, really funny, right? And Giriko's like, yeah, I know, like, I wasn't sure if I should mention it or not. But Akane's like, hey, how about we just bring one for his appearance's sake, right? As Giriko's just like, hey, I mean, he's got to look the part if he's going to tighten the loincloth of his heart. And Akane's like, oh, so he's told you that motto? And Giriko's like, yeah, he told it to me before I left for Osaka. He was in Osaka, not Kanto. My bad. And pretty much we just see a little bit of a flashback where Shiguma told this to Giriko, right? And Akane just thinks, like, hey, so how did it go? Did you embarrass yourself over there? And Giriko's like, hey, hell no. He would have torn me a new one. And, of course, hearing this, like, he would have torn me a new one, the two of them just sort of start to look very sad on the ground, as Akane just says, hey, Anisan, do you think he'll get to scold us for being embarrassing again? As Akane just remembers back to whenever she was sitting in the room with the doctor and getting all of the conditions of Shiguma explained to her, as the doctor says, like, hey, it was an acute mitochondrial infraction heart attack. The surgery was actually successful, but just in case, we gave him a CT scan just in case, and it revealed throat cancer. It's early stage 2 at the moment. There's a good chance that we can treat it, radiation therapy, however, we'll have to perform surgery. And hearing all of this, we see that the panel where Akane gets told this gets turned upside down. So, of course, throat cancer isn't something for somebody like Shiguma, a performing artist, to go through. And we cut back to the present where Akane is talking to Giriko, as she's just starting to tear up and cry, and her voice is getting all scratchy. She just says, like, hey, it's all a mess. He's got cancer, and even if it gets better, he might lose his voice because of it. I thought I'd get to hear more of his stories. I thought I'd get to learn so many more things from him. But Giriko just says, like, hey, pull your head up, Akane. I feel the same way. If I would have known this would have happened, I wouldn't have gone to Osaka like an idiot. I would have stayed here to learn more from my own master. But we cannot turn back time, so the least we can do is believe in Master and hold our heads up high and support him. That's what an apprentice does. And hearing this, Akane's like, yeah, I mean, that's a really nice speech, but all of the tears and snot sort of ruin it. As the two of them sort of make a little bit of a more lightful note off of this devastating situation. And at this point, we see that Giriko and Akane are heading back up to the hospital where, of course, Shiguma is, to drop off all of the goods and stuff that they had. And as this happens, they walk up the stairs and get to the room where Shiguma is being held right now. Of course, still sleeping and doing all of that. Akane opens the door and is like, hey, pardon me for entering. And at this moment, we see she looks inside the room and her eyes suddenly go white and pale. As we see standing in the room is the silhouette of Isho Arakawa. And seeing this, Isho looks over and looks at Akane and says, oh girl, I've already been filled already. He's got a long road ahead. And Akane doesn't say anything to this like, yeah, I mean, he's completely right. I mean, he's probably is justified to be here. But the show just continues. At this point, there can't be anything left for you to learn from this wreck of a man. And Akane's like, oh, well, what are you talking about? But Isho just continues saying like, hey, I've already spoken with all of the principals and figures of the group. I'm dismantling the Shiguma school. The 4 apprentices, excluding Mikaru Arakawa, will be sent to various different guardians. And Akane's like, wait, what? Dismantling the school? Like, guardians? Who said you guys could decide all of that? My master is Shiguma Arakawa. You don't have any right telling me what to do. As Isho just gives Akane this stare. And he just says like, oh, it's already been decided. Your guardian, Akane Arakawa, is me. You will be under the care of the Isho Arakawa. And that is where we end this chapter of Akane-banashi. Oh, this is probably the chapter of the year when it comes to manga chapters for me. This was such an incredible chapter of going through, learning more about what's happened to Shiguma, seeing the sad realization that he's got throat cancer, along with that he had a heart attack, and that he could lose his voice so easily just because of it. And understanding this, and eventually the mention that Giriko and Akane have this really emotional moment talking about their master and somebody who they don't know how much longer he's going to be around for, but they want to make the most of the time that he's still there with them, only then to get told, hey, you guys can't do that. I'm dismantling this school. It is, the feeling is incredible. And the way that Isho is always portrayed as this major antagonist, it's honestly amazing. And this whole idea of like, hey, Akane, you're going to be under the care of Isho Arakawa. It's just a crazy moment. Like, this chapter of Akane-banashi is everything you want in a chapter of manga through and through. With that, let's move on to Blue Box, chapter number 168. This chapter is titled, This is Who I Am. Our cover page is just, we see Chinatsu there, and she's holding a basketball up against her head. Really awesome, like, shot we get here. Like, I don't know, just the way this is drawn, like, the way that, she's got this shirt on and, like, the tie coming down. I don't know. I just really like how this image looks. I don't know. I just really like it. At this point, we just sort of get a little bit of narration chapter, like, hey, going back in time a little while, we see that Ayame is sitting out, outside of the school festival, and she's pretty much just, like, drinking all of the waters that she bought for Kyo last time, just thinking, like, hey, I know I can't drink all of these, maybe I'll give one of them to, like, Hinachi or something later. And she remembers back inside of the room where she saw Saki committing a crime against Kyo, all things considered. And Ayame just thinks like, hey, I know I saw something I shouldn't have. And beyond that, she also heard what Saki said to Kyo about told him like, hey, Kyo, but you liked me and all of that. And she thinks like, hey, for someone as stoic as him to fall in love, it must be like a really big deal. I bet that's his first love. And if he turned to me now, I would be a nuisance hanging around him with my, I sorta like you feelings. Like, yeah. I finally like seeing that Ayame has fully said it in the context of this chapter. Of course we knew it, but we've never heard her actually admit it to herself. And that's what she's sort of going in here, right? And she just says, like, hey, I can't pursue someone when there's another girl still in the picture. And she's like, hey, I mean, Kyo may act like he likes me, but he never said anything concrete. I guess I didn't like him enough to overcome any obstacles that got in the way. And she's like, all right, well, I'm going to go buy something to eat. And at this point, we see that Tasasago walks up to Mori and just says, like, hey, how's it going? Like, hey, funny, I keep running into you today. Like, and she was like, yeah, we're all at school in this, like, centralized location. Like, no shit, Sherlock, right? But Tasakago's like, hey, someone gave me bread. Like, do you want some? And she's like, yeah, sure, I'll take some. And it's like, hey, it's pretty cute then. Why don't we split it in half? And he pretty much just, like, splits it in half, like, cutting the face of this bear treat in half, right? And she's like, hey, so ruthless, look at that. And pretty much they're talking about, like, hey, next time I'll fillet it and all doing all of that sort of deals, right? But Tasakago just says, like, hey, fine then, next time I'll make sure to get 2 of them, right? So he's like, hey, so I'd appreciate it if I could have another opportunity like this, right? And Ayame instantly picks up what Tasasago is putting down and is like, hey, you're right. Let's go out. As we just see that Tasasago's like, hey, are you sure? Like, with me, really? And I'm like, hey, thank you for having me. And, like, Mori's like, hey, the pleasure's all mine. As we see that she's had this moment and she's like, hey, I guess I forgot what I was like before. Now I remember, this is who I am. As we see more of her, like, initial introduction in the series where she's like, hey, when somebody tells you they like you, why not go out with them? Sort of her initial feelings in the series, right? At this point, we cut over to see what Taiki's up to during all of this time. And of course, he needs to do this stamp rally because for, of course, Chinatsu's sake. He's like, right, I'm going for it. Those prizes, all of those stamps are going to be mine, right? As we pretty much see, like, he's mainlining to do all of this sort of deal. And as he's running around, he's like, right, if I can get those stamps, including Chinatsu Senpai's, by 2 p.m. today at the end of her shift, then she'll give me some special prize. And as he's running around getting ready to do all of this sort of stuff, she spots Chinatsu in the back running away somewhere, as all of a sudden, a bunch of the people in his class are like, hey, Inomata, perfect timing, help us carry some stuff, will you? As they pretty much, like, drag him off to make sure that he cannot spend time with his girlfriend. And I honestly find it really funny how they even tell Taiki to his face, like, hey, the least we can do now is prevent you from making any concrete memories with her. Like, they specifically tell him that, right? We see that Taiki helps all of them off screen and is then on his goal some more to go and find and figure out and do all of this stuff, find Chinatsu and get all of the stamps, right? We see a bunch of his classmates are just being clumsy and, like, drop a bunch of papers, like, hey, Taiki, but can you help me read this map and pick up all of these papers? And Taiki's like, damn it, like, I'm never going to see Chinatsu Senpai, right? And he's like, hey, damn it. For some reason, people keep asking for my help. As he's finally running by all of the basketball courts and all of that. And he sees Chinatsu go into a building, right? And at this point, some of the members of the basketball team sort of stop and like, hey, Taiki, if you want to go through here, you're going to have to beat us. And Taiki starts to, like, run away to, like, find a different way around. But they're like, hey, don't find a different way around. And Taiki's like, what do you mean beat you? Like, what do you mean by this? And, one of the guys just says, like, hey, it'll be a meaningful fight for you two. A free throw face-off. Your girlfriend's the ace of the girls' basketball team, so her boyfriend has to be at least able to win this contest, right? And Taiki's like, hey, I thought these guys looked familiar. Yes, of course, they're on the boys' basketball team, right? And at this point, we see a hand appears on Taiki's shoulder, and he's like, hey, that's no fair. Let's make it a 2-on-2. As we see Matsuoka Senpai has suddenly appeared, and everybody's like, Matsuoka, you traitor, were you helping out Taiki? And Taiki's like, Matsuoka Senpai is the star of the boys basketball team. With him on my side, I can't lose whatsoever. And we see that Matsuoka goes up to make a free throw, and as he does it, he just shoots the ball, and obviously in a shot he could have made, does not make it whatsoever, right? He's like, oh, my bad. I guess my hand slipped back there. And Taiki's like, damn it, like, you totally did that on purpose. Like, why did I even trust you to do this? We see that Taiki makes a few free throws that makes them in. We see that Matsuoka isn't very helpful at all. And all of this is just going on. One of the basketball players just is like, hey, what's Kano going to think about you if you lose, like, a weak boyfriend who sucks at basketball? I'm sure she'll be disappointed. And at this point, Nagisa and some of Chinatsu's friends walk by and just is like, oh, yeah, about that, she literally won't care. Like, Chinatsu's the one who's head over heels for him. Like, let me tell you how she's been lately. Like, whenever we enter the gym, she glances towards the badminton team. She disappears during lunch with a spring in her step. Whenever she catches the sight of Inamata around school, it puts a smile on her face. As all of the basketball team boys just like, no, stop it. Like, what's going on over here, right? We pretty much treated like, hey, this has made the basketball team lose all of their will to fight. Just a lot of really funny jokes here, and Matsuoka is experiencing his umpteenth heartache, right? Which is just like, yeah, Matsuoka liked Chinatsu, but like, hey, whatever. We see Taiki makes another free throw, and he ends up winning in this grand scheme of things. And at this point, he runs away from the general area and just is like, hey, damn it, that made me lose sight of her. I think she went this way. And as he's looking around, he's like, hey, where are you, Chinatsu? Where are you? And we see another person. We don't see their face or anything, but they just say, like, hey, it looked like you were looking for that cat mascot earlier. If you're still looking for them, it looks like they went over that way. And Taiki just says, like, oh, hey, really? And the guy just says, like, hey, it looks like they went towards the shed back there. So Taiki starts to run over this shed and says, like, hey, thank you so much, bro. Like, I really need to help you out like this. Like, I haven't felt kindness like this in such a long time. And as he eventually runs around to the shed, he opens the door and he says, like, hey, Chinatsu-senpai, maybe she's taking a break in the shed or something. And he's like, hey, are you in here, Chinatsu? And as he goes in, the door closes behind him. He's like, hello, what's going on? And he then realizes, oh, no. The door automatically locks. I'm still in here. He's like, hello, is anyone there? And he's like, don't tell me I'm trapped. This is where we end this chapter of Blue Box with Taiki stuck in the sports court area. This may be one of like the most regular tropes I have ever seen in a manga, but I love this chapter. One of my favorite Blue Box characters is Matsuoka, and just seeing Matsuoka coming in to be an agent of chaos was absolutely amazing. Like, he just comes through like, hey, let's make it 2-on-2. That isn't fair. And then he just screws Taiki over. It is just so incredibly funny. I love Matsuoka. He's just great. But also, like, the whole confession and deal between Ayame and Tasasago is really nicely done. And I can see why some people would say, like, hey, this is just taking all of the character development that Ayame has had and just throwing it down the toilet. But no, it's doing it for a very good reason of, yeah, this is how she feels right now after having this happen to her. It's very good for the context of the series itself, right? And then getting to the end where apparently this guy just completely lied to Taiki to get him locked so he wouldn't be around Chinatsu. Yeah, sort of is what it is there, but still great chapter through and through. And with that, let's move on to the final of the chapters I'll be talking about for an extended period of time. And it is the Elusive Samurai, chapter number 176. This chapter is titled The End of the Divine Age, 1338. Alright, I just took a little bit of a break there, sort of give my voice a little bit of a break, and I did not realize I've been already yapping for an hour about 5 chapters of manga, but sort of is what it is. But this is the last one, so this video should hopefully be under an hour and 30 minutes, or at least that is my goal, if this being a mini episode at least. Hey, anything under 2 hours and 30 minutes though, which is what the last one took, is fine by me. But to hop into this Elusive Samurai chapter, of course, we start off with Mima, who has just heard the declaration of marriage and love that Tokiyuki gave to her last time, and mainly to her father, as Mima just thinks like, hey, a marriage proposal during a battle in a storm? That's going way too far. It's so not Basara. That totally is Basara. And as all of this happens, Mima starts to faint, and the storm around them completely disappears, right? And we see in the sort of like ethereal plane, I guess, wherever Yorishige and Shizuku are, Yorishige's like, hey, look at that, the storm suddenly like disappeared, right? And hearing all of this, like everything that's happened, Shizuku's like, hey, no, I was going to entrust Nisama to Ayako and then vanish. So how did Mima end up as his bride? Like, I cannot leave that insect to him. As we just see that Shizuku's got like a very not great view of Mima in this moment, right? And we pretty much just also hear what Tokiyuki's saying, like, hey, she hates me so much she tried to kill me, so I may never fully win her affection. Nonetheless, I will value her. I hurt her, so I owe her that much, right? And Shizuku's like, hey, no, Tokiyuki, she's crazier for you, that's why she tried to kill you. And hearing all of this, Yoroshige's like, hey, Tokiyuki-sama is right. Instead of marrying because they're in love, they may learn to love each other once they are married. That is the way of these times. Do you resent being shut out? And at this moment, we see that all of the other elusive warriors and all of the other people that are under the Hojo control are starting to fire arrows and doing all of this over towards where Mima's father is. I forget what his name right now is. I think it's Sasaki, as we'll get into. But as all of the arrows are being fired at him, Sasaki just is like, hey, I will not give my daughter to the enemy. But Tokyo's like, hey, you didn't treat her the way a parent should, so I may not be your enemy, but I'm Mima's ally. He just continues like, hey, but your lineage isn't suitable for the Sasaki family. And Tokyo's just like, lineage? What have you got to say about the Hojo heir? You kissed my father's butt, Sasaki. And she just, or not she, Tokyo just says like, hey, I remember during the battle for Kamakura, you shaved your head to win my father's favor. If the Karakura shogunate were still in charge and Mima and I were in marriage talks, you would be weeping for joy. And at this moment, all of the Hojo forces are just completely devastating Sasaki and his ship, right? As Sasaki's like, hey, we must flee, like, we need to get out of here. And he's like, no, but my Mima, how could we be leaving here, right? As all this happens, we see that Tokiyuki sort of floats over to where Kojiro is. Kojiro throws down a rope like, hey, I'll pull you up, Tokiyuki. And he's like, hey, Mima too. And he's like, hey, what about Shizuku? Like, Shizuku, where are you? This solves everything, so come back to us, right? And Shizuku, of course, in the ethereal planes is like, hey, this doesn't solve anything. I'm already disappearing, right? As she's thinking like, hey, it already seems that Mima's taken my place, so if I just disappear, everything will be the same without me, with just Mima there instead, right? But Yoroshigeji just says like, hey, Shizuku, your divine power is dissipating. You cannot return to your normal body now. And he says like, hey, as a deity, you'll just disappear. But the way you are now, you can still become a human. And Shizuku's like, hey, I can, like, how can I do this then? And Yoroshigeji just says, oh, you must just will it. Gods and humans exist if you believe that they do. Divine power comes from the gods, and Mima scattered all of yours, so absorb it and create a body for yourself. And Shizuku's like, but can I really do something like that? And Yoroshige's like, yes, I am sure of it. You worry about the future and grow jealous, but strong emotions can turn the immortal mortal. Sometimes I was unable to see the future in front of me, but it was that in certain situations, like when my grandson and my son were born, and also the first time Tokiyuki was seriously injured. As we just remember a little bit of like, yes, Yorishige also loved Tokiyuki so much that it merely made him human in those moments, right? And Yorishige just is like, hey, trust in the power of your love and return to your lord. And Shizuku just thinks like, yeah, you're right, I will. As we remember to whenever everybody was at the shrine earlier in the series and they were all praying for the new beginning, we pretty much see like, hey, Kojiro was praying to the gods to make him strong, Natsu wanted to eat some more sushi without dying again, Ginbo was more of like, hey, I want money, I want girls, and I want shit. Like, I want to have all of it, right? And of course, Tokiyuki didn't ask for anything in specific, as Shizuku just thinks this like, hey, Tokiyuki doesn't ask the gods for anything, he just thanks and reports to them because he prefers to rely on people. Together with Tokiyuki, I want to be a human and know happiness. Human. I am a human being. It's a miracle to create one more person in this world, and it's a miracle of boundless power. as we see suddenly Shizuku form a body in the ocean all of a sudden, right behind where Tokiyuki and everybody is. And Shizuku just says, "As your steward, there's much I want to say. What is important right now is that I am very hungry." As we see that Shizuku is completely blushing in this moment. Of course, being like this is a manga, she does not have clothes on, so she sort of like got scraps covering her body, right? And everybody goes like, "Hey, Shizuku, you're here." We see that Tokiyuki gives her a massive hug. We see Kojiro, Natsu, Ayako, and also Sword Girl, Sheena, I think. We see all of them are going around her, right? Like, "Hey, we're so glad you came back. Like, we'll catch some fish and cook them up for you," right? And as all of this happens, we see up in the sky, we see Yorishige sort of fading away a little bit more as he just thinks like, "Hey, this mysterious battle has ended. You no longer need to fear the storm, Tokiyuki." And at this point, we get a little bit more narration from the historical aspect of the Elusive Samurai. As this narration just reads, the tales tell of Takeuchi's good luck and the miracles that came to him. But these tales speak only of Tokiyuki's ill fortune. But did the god and Buddhas not favor him, or did his life merely rely on human power? Either way, after this storm, the records no longer tell of divine winds blowing in Takeuchi's favor, or storms bothering Tokiyuki. And honestly, I thought this was like a pretty mid chapter. I really like seeing Yorishige more, being that I think Yorishige is the best part of the Elusive Samurai. But it was this final note on the historical aspect of the records no longer tell of divine winds blowing in Takeuchi's favor, of course referring to how Mima's powers in this like historical aspect of the series have shown it being done, or storms bothering Tokiyuki. It was just this little moment of just, damn, that's honestly a really, really nice message, and was really the reason I wanted to talk about this chapter in the first place. But with that is the Elusive Samurai, and they're a good chapter. And with that, I'm going to just speed through the rest of these chapters, probably in like under a minute each. Hey guys, post-production Glowplasma 231 here, and as you can probably tell by the length of this video, I actually do not do this. I recorded the whole section where, yes, I did go through the rest of the chapters that I read this week, besides for these like initial 7 that I have briefly talked about in the video so far, but since the recording of this first mini episode of the Weekly Shonen Jump podcast, I have actually recorded another one and sort of perfected the form how I like to do this in. And being that I have been super lazy and did not get this video edited or uploaded before I recorded that other one, I've pretty much changed up how many episodes work. Number 1, I just talked about the 6 series I want to talk about, and I just sort of don't talk about the rest of them. So next part of this video you are actually going to see is where I go through, sit down, and not rank all of the chapters since I've already ranked all of them, but go through and actively like explain like, hey, here's what I thought. And you can see my general rankings, and I forget if I talk about the other series in those rankings. I forget if I do or not. I may, but it is what it is. Just letting you guys know that this series has changed a little bit since this initial recording. And also that section where I talked about like Undead Unluck all the way up to Witch Watch and all of those other chapters in between, it wasn't that good. It was sort of me of just like quickly going through, okay guys, here at Undead Unluck, this small thing happens, or it's a sort of a big thing, but I didn't feel like talking about it because I thought this was more interesting in one of the other chapters. So it really wasn't like the biggest deal ever. So that's just all for me for post-production Glowplasma 231. Also, I will be making a few OBS references because I've recently been trying to use OBS more, but for some reason in the recording of the final like screen share with my spreadsheet, OBS wasn't working. You will hear about that in like the first 20 seconds or whatever. It made more sense with the context of the other things I'm cutting out, but either way, that's what it is. Thank you guys so very much for watching, and now back to the main video itself. Alright, and with that, OBS does not seem like it's going to be working for me today. I guess I need to try out my settings more. So we're just going to be using my regular thing to sort it out, and alrighty, it looks like we're here on the spreadsheet now. You guys should be seeing it right in front of you. So yeah, like I said, I already ranked this entire issue number 46, as you see here. Let's maybe scroll over, get a little bit more in the middle. So yep, I obviously said the best chapter of this week was Akane-banashi. Like, how can you read a chapter about the throat cancer and understanding everything that they've got here? And really the biggest moment, I think, maybe just Kiriko's like, hey, I shouldn't have gone to Osaka to do that because I'm missing out the time I could have spent with one of the most important people in my life before he passes. It's such an emotional moment. Next up, Ichi the Witch, great chapter, Blue Box, Kagurabachi, One Piece, Hima-Ten, and the Elusive Samurai. Like I said, I want to talk about the seven best chapters this week in my opinion. Then going on into Ultimate Excess Kyoshi, Undead Unlock, Hunter x Hunter, Witch Watch, Shinobi Undercover, Astro Royale, and Kill Blue. Eventually getting down to the character of the week, who I decided to be Chihiro from Kagurabachi, and I had to give an honorable mention to Matsuoka because, bro, I absolutely love Matsuoka. Like, he's such a fun and awesome character, and just seeing how he, like, sort of screwed up Taiki there, it was just really, really funny to see. I think there were definitely some other really strong contenders. I mean, Julia was a good one, Kyoshi was a good one, I even think Shizuku was a great one. Yeah, Chihiro definitely won it out for me, with Matsuoka as, like, that, like, honorable mention. He doesn't deserve it, but he is going to be who ends up getting it, all things considered. But yeah, great chapters this week. Of course, like Akane-banashi, Ichi the Witch, Blue Box, Kagurabachi, One Piece, Hima-Ten, and Elusive Samurai. Like, if those weren't theirs, like, great chapters, I probably wouldn't have talked about this week in Jump. So you can thank those manga for making me record a video when I honestly need to be doing schoolwork, because today's Friday, I don't want to have to do schoolwork this weekend, but sort of is what it is. I decided to record a video instead. So yeah, with that, we're going to stop sharing the screen here. We need to go and save and edit. Alrighty. That's all done right there. So yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching this episode, or this mini episode of Let's Talk About Weekly Shonen Jump, issue number 46. Yeah, 46 of 2024. This was a fun one. I enjoyed talking about just those few series, so I may do this more often, or I may do other videos where I just talk about everything. We'll just see how we go from here. But yeah, great issue of Jump through and through this week. And yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you mind subscribing to the channel and checking out some of the other videos I have. I've got a whole playlist of where I talk about the various weekly Shonen Jump chapters. Link down in the description down below. It'll also be at the end of this video. And also, if you're watching this as a video, you may not know that this is on podcasting platforms. And if you are listening to this on podcasting platforms, you may not know that I've got a YouTube channel. So go check out all of those things. Everything's linked in the description of wherever you find this podcast or video. All of the links to all of my various things are scattered down around there. So yeah, I also cover other anime and manga related content. Not so much anime right now. I'm trying to get caught up on all of the manga series before I start talking about anime, not get even more behind talking about the current up-to-date manga. Being the anime is seasonal, while manga is like every single week. So sometimes I don't do a great job, and other times I think I do a pretty good job at it. But ever since we've had the Hurricane Helene that has hit the southeastern United States, I have just been backed up, and like taking a 3-week break there wasn't really what I needed to do, so it sort of is what it is there, all things considered. But thank you guys so very much for watching this video, as I said a few minutes ago. And yeah, with that, I really don't have too much else to say, and I will probably just be catching you guys next time for issue number maybe 47, maybe 48. We will be seeing next time I record one of these. It may be a mini, it may not be, but either way, thank you guys so very much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the video today. If you guys want to see more like this in the future, just let me know. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. This will be Glowplasma 231, signing out.